Jordan Peterson's career as a public figure arguably began with his opposition to Canada's Bill C-16. This legislative summary from the Library of Parliament describes the bill as follows. The bill adds gender identity or expression to the list of prohibited grounds of discrimination in the Canadian Human Rights Act, and the list of characteristics of identifiable groups protected from hate propaganda in the Criminal Code. Peterson claimed this amounted to a law for compelled speech.
It requires compelled speech. The Ontario Human Rights Commission explicitly states that refusing to refer to a person by their self-identified name and proper personal pronoun, which is the pronouns that I was objecting to, can be interpreted as harassment, and so that's explicitly defined in the relevant policies. So I think that's appalling. First of all, because there hasn't been a piece of legislation that requires Canadians to utter a particular form of address that has particular ideological implications before, and I think that it's a line that we shouldn't cross.
Since then, he has maintained that the part of the bill he cares more about is the compelled speech part, not so much the gender part.
But I'm not saying words that other people want me to say. And the idea of compelled speech is like, the bill was this much about gender.
Right.
And it was this much about,
right.
Oh yeah, the government's going to tell me what to say, hey.
From the beginning, though, legal experts have disagreed with Peterson. Speaking on Bill C-16, law professor at the University of Toronto, Brenda Kosman, said, the misuse of gender pronouns without more cannot rise to the level of a crime. More recently, Peterson has voiced opposition to another legal issue related to sex and gender, bans on gay conversion therapy. To be clear, this isn't because he thinks conversion therapy works. Peterson has stated that he doesn't think being gay is a pathology or something that can be purposely changed.
So I think the talk of conversion therapy, if someone's saying, well, I'll cure you of your homosexuality, it's like, well, it's not a disease, first of all, and so it doesn't need a cure, and probably you can't do that anyways, and it's not the proper way to advertise clinical services, let's say, because that isn't really how a clinical relationship works.
Peterson's concerns instead come from his idea that conversion therapy bans limit the ability of therapists to do their job.
And then so now in Canada, because they banned conversion therapy, it's now all affirmation therapy.
Right,
There's no such thing as affirmation therapy. Look, I had a 14-year-old kid who was a client of mine, and he was in the mid stages of puberty. He was a pretty creative kid. Well, there was an aggressively gay guy in his school. Was hitting on him and trying to convince him that he was gay. Mm-hmm. Well, he didn't know. So he wanted to talk to me about it. It's like, well, I was going to tell him. What the hell do I know about this kid?
Exactly.
And I wanted to hear what his problems were and how it might be sorted out, what he wanted. And like that's what you do in therapy, is you help people sort out their problems. Now this idea is you come to me with an axiomatic claim, whatever it is about your identity, and my job is to rubber stamp it. It's like, I'm not a therapist then. The notion that therapists affirm is an anti-truth, because look, let's say you come to me and you say, you have a proposition about yourself, and I say, no, I'm your therapist. No, that's wrong. It's like, that's not good therapy. But neither is, you have a proposition about yourself and you're disturbed enough to come to a therapeutic session, and I say, yes, you're right. It's like, I don't know if you're right.
Mm-hmm. In December 2021, Bill C-4 was passed unanimously by the House of Commons in Canada. According to a legislative summary from the Library of Parliament, Bill C-4 amends the Criminal Code to, among other things, prohibit anyone from causing a person to undergo conversion therapy or providing it to a person, promoting or advertising services related to conversion therapy, removing a child from Canada to undergo conversion therapy abroad, and receiving a financial or material benefit from the provision of conversion therapy. Motivating this ban is the widespread agreement among major health organizations in the developed world that practices like these are ineffective and harmful. According to the American Medical Association, conversion practices are not only ineffective, but have been shown to result in depression, anxiety, sexual dysfunction, and an increase in suicidal behaviors. That said, is Peterson's understanding of the ban correct? Are mental health professionals now legally obligated to tell any clients curious or confused about their sexuality or gender that they are LGBT? would Peterson be breaking the law by honestly exploring the identity of a client? The bill defines conversion therapy as follows: a practice, treatment, or service designed to change a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual, change a person's gender identity to cisgender, change a person's gender expression so that it conforms to the sex assigned to the person at birth, repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior, repress a person's non-cisgender identity, or repress or reduce a person's gender expression that does not conform to the sex assigned to the person at birth. It then continues, for greater certainty, this definition does not include a practice, treatment, or service that relates to the exploration or development of an integrated personal identity, such as a practice, treatment, or service that relates to a person's gender transition, and that is not based on an assumption that a particular sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression is to be preferred over another. If that's a bit complicated for you, the gist is this. In this bill, conversion therapy refers only to systematic efforts that assume that one orientation or identity is inherently preferable to another, and subsequently attempts to change or repress a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. So, no, Peterson nor any other mental health professional is required to tell a client they are LGBT, or even rubber stamp their identity. Exploration of identity is not discouraged here. When Peterson says about his approach to a sexually confused client,
it's like, well, I was going to tell him. What the hell do I know about this kid?
Exactly.
And I wanted to hear what his problems were and how it might be sorted out, what he wanted. And that's what you do in therapy, is you help people sort out their problems.
he describes a perfectly acceptable method of therapy under the law. It appears that, once again, Peterson does not understand a bill he is criticizing. Even so, he's continued to speak against it, even citing the bill as a reason he left the University of Toronto. As his 2022 op-ed in the National Post reads, that, combined with some recent legislative changes in Canada claiming to outlaw so-called conversion therapy, but really making it exceedingly risky for clinicians to do anything ever but agree always and about everything with their clients, have likely doomed the practice of clinical psychology. Thanks to statements like these, Peterson has gained a place at the forefront of the conservative battle against affirming care for sexual and gender minorities. Just recently, more than 100 articles have been published on Elon Musk comparing his child's gender transition to her being killed by the woke mind virus during an interview with Jordan Peterson. While centrist and left-leaning sources tended to respect the gender of Musk's adult child, right-leaning outlets seem to reinforce Musk's intentional misgendering. I was able to easily compare these perspectives, of course, on Ground News, a news aggregator app and website I actually use every day. Do yourself a favor and check them out at ground.news/skeptic. They've even developed a My News Bias dashboard to keep track of your personal reading habits and if you have any news blind spots. Because most likely, yes. Yes, you do. This custom dashboard really helps me be mindful of how my news consumption is shaped and possibly even skewed by the type of sources and narratives I gravitate toward most. And by plainly seeing where the news I read is coming from, I can intentionally diversify how I stay up to date. Which is something Ground News makes even easier with their interest pages. I can follow my favorite topics to create a personalized news feed while still having access to the full spectrum of perspectives, ensuring that I have a more well-rounded understanding of any issue. So you can follow LGBTQ issues, religion, or even Jordan Peterson. Follow what you want, I won't judge. Okay, yeah, I probably judged a little. Go to ground.news/skeptic to try the best way to read the news. Subscribe through my link for 40% off the same unlimited access Vantage subscription that I use. Don't let crafty headlines and media bias keep you in an echo chamber. Use the incredible tools Ground News provides to see all sides and stay fully informed every time you read the news. So, strangely, even as he's placed emphasis on the importance of honest exploration in therapy and said that attempts to change sexual orientation are not effective or appropriate clinical practice, Peterson has actually defended the practice of conversion therapy to a degree.
So many legislatures around the world now have banned so-called conversion therapy. And to me, this has been a catastrophe. Now, I know that there was a small percentage, mostly of fundamentalist Christian therapist types in the US, who were offering their services to homosexual people who were unhappy with their sexual orientation. And so you could have a discussion about whether that's ever appropriate or not, although I would say that's bloody well between the person and their therapist, as far as I'm concerned. But now that's illegal.
Like he said, conversion practices are usually religiously motivated, and while a relatively small minority of therapists in the developed world practice something like this, their reach is further than you might think. A recent study on the experiences of LGBTQ people in Canada found that 10% of respondents had experienced conversion therapy practices, though for trans and non-binary respondents, the rate was about 20%. 67% experienced conversion therapy practices in a religious setting, and 20% experienced it in licensed healthcare provider offices. The vast majority, that is 72% of those who experience conversion therapy practices, first attended before the age of 20. Now, this is the case in Canada. Studies of US LGBTQ populations point to an even greater prevalence of conversion practices. I'll link an article on that in the description if you'd like to read up on that. It's clear then that a significant number of queer people experience this harmful practice both inside and outside of religious settings, and people under 20 are most commonly subjected to it. This is a practice which does not allow for honest exploration of identity. It affirms only a specific, narrow view of identity, denies that any other view can rightfully exist, and is usually performed on kids. If I've understood Peterson correctly, he is against subjecting vulnerable young clients to a form of therapy that refuses honest exploration of identity in favor of shaping them into a particular model of sexuality or gender. Why then does he direct criticism at a yet unseen, hypothetical vision of affirmation therapy while defending the right of the existence of conversion therapy, a practice which we know happens, is demonstrably harmful, and contradicts the proper practice of therapy as Peterson himself defines it?
Let's say you come to me and you say, you have a proposition about yourself, and I say, no, I'm your therapist. No, that's wrong. It's like, that's not good therapy.
Why, in his mind, doesn't conversion therapy threaten the continued existence of clinical psychology? Why does it deserve legal protection while the mere phantom of so-called affirmation therapy should be treated as a gross violation of proper clinical practice? For help understanding conversion therapy bans and the anxieties around them, I reached out to counseling psychologist Dr. Igi Moon, who is the chair of the Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, coalition in the UK. The MOU is a document signed by over 25 health, counseling, and psychotherapy organizations which aims to end the practice of conversion therapy in the UK for LGBTQ people of all kinds. I showed them all of the clips of Peterson that I've shown you in this video so far, and they had this to say.
Is that what he said? He said that, yeah? Gosh.
Yeah, well, what are your thoughts there?
Look, I can talk about the MOU. The MOU says explicitly the position of the MOU is not to deny or discourage or exclude anyone who's got any uncertain feelings around their sexuality or gender identity from seeking or receiving that appropriate help. And, you know, that actually we should explore it. And I think we represent quite a lot of healthcare workers, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, and it's for them to decide in their organisations how they intend to roll that out. So we don't deny that people may want to explore, and there is no trying to prevent people from exploring who they are. Where I work, these are conversations that you would have, and you'd have them in a way whereby you could explore gender and the parents are in the room and the clinicians are there, and you can do it in lots of different ways, because I'm sure that Jordan must know that by now the therapy world has got an expansive way of exploring with young people who they are, what they want to do, and how they want to be.
Having read up on conversion therapy bans, this is what I expected. But Dr. Moon also shared some insight into the anxiety surrounding conversion therapy bans, which I hadn't considered.
I do think, Drew, that it probably raises that issue. I did some research, and I did it consistently between 1994 and 2009, and it showed that in the training of counselling psychologists in the UK, it was a maximum of 16 hours over 7 years of training, because they'd reached doctoral level. So over 7 years of training, they'd only had 16 hours in total of what was called often difference and diversity, these euphemisms that then crop up, that ghettoise intersectional thinking. So when you ask, if I asked a doctoral level counselling psychology student, okay, what have you thought about in relation to religion, horror, gender, sexuality, class, ethnicity, race, disability? To think that the maximum that they'd had on all of those topics was 16 hours, I think sort of gives us an explanation as to why people might go, oh dear, if I'm faced with a transgender lesbian, what's that going to mean about what they want from me? I can't do it. I'm really very unable to do it. The problem is not me. It's to do with, these conversion therapy bans.
Now, I do think Dr. Moon might be onto something in the case of certain therapists, particularly in the UK. But in Peterson's case, and in North America generally, there's another factor that must be considered. Remember this clip I showed near the beginning?
And the idea of compelled speech, it's like the bill was this much about gender.
Right.
And it was this much about, right. Oh yeah, the government's going to tell me what to say, hey.
Well, listen to what Ben Shapiro said in response.
To me, the problem with a lot of this is less a free speech issue, even though I'm on the same page with you. Mm-hmm. And to me, it really is a fundamental truth issue, meaning that, yeah, you're trying to force me to say something I don't want to say. Mm-hmm. But to me, the fact that what you're trying to force me to say is so innately opposed to the good is the problem. Like you could try. I would have objections to you forcing me to say that I like a particular movie, right? Mm-hmm. It may not be true. I don't like the particular movie. It would be bad if you tried to force me to say that. But the level of passion that I have for issues like this one really go to the fact that I think the fundamental good of humanity relies on basic acknowledgments of biological truth, especially when it comes to gender.
Within months of this conversation, in 2022, Shapiro would sign Peterson to his media company. Their show hosts had already voiced a particular view of conversion therapy bans based not on their expertise in counseling or psychology, but upon their religious views.
So, Matt, you were the first person I saw tweet out this new Canada law, the actual text of this new law in Canada, which effectively bans both religion and reason in the country.
Yes.
I mean, it is a bill that is just mad.
It is a fall of the West bill.
It is a stark, raving, mad bill encoded into law and punishable by 5 years in prison. If you use your brain or you worship God or both, then you are going to end up in prison in Canada for being a baseline decent parent.
If you encourage your son, let's say, to embrace his biological identity, if you say to your son, you are a boy and that's good, and you're a male and that's what you should be, that's conversion by telling him to be who he is. That's conversion therapy, and you can go to prison for it. And it also means that, as many pastors in Canada have realized, that if they get up there at the pulpit, and very few pastors are even doing this anyway, but if they did get up there at the pulpit and read from the Pauline epistles or give a sermon about biblical sexual morality, they are guilty of conversion therapy. It could go to prison.
This is being described as an issue of religious liberty. And of course, to a degree, it is about religious liberty. They just outlawed Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But it's deeper than just religious liberty. They've outlawed the truth. They've outlawed the truth. Yeah. If you tell your kid the truth about who he is, you'll go to prison.
It's clear here that these guys do not at all understand the bill, its actual prohibitions, or its scope. No, you can't get arrested for preaching against queerness in church or to your child in Canada. You can get in trouble for putting them in a program specifically meant to change their sexual orientation and gender identity. Even before this conversation, the far-right religious think tank, the Heritage Foundation, published an article on the issue claiming a conversion therapy ban in Utah in 2020 enforced an LGBT activist agenda of mandating immediate and unquestioning affirmation of a child's stated gender identity. The ban, according to them, was not targeted at particular practices, but instead at particular values. Sound familiar? As conservative media spread this view of the issue, certain Christians in the US and Canada took to social media to voice panicked views on how Bill C-4 would ban Christianity in Canada. Before Peterson completely left his work as a clinician and scholar, the world he would enter into next, that of the religious right, already held this view of conversion therapy and its bans. It seems a part of his actual training as a psychologist still shapes his view.
It's not a disease, first of all, and so it doesn't need a cure, and probably you can't do that anyways.
But the rest of his perspective echoes that of his peers and employers on the religious right, even when that drives him to make statements which contradict his own stated values. Since Peterson doesn't originally come from this world, I suspect that the religious right sees him as a source of scientific or scholarly validation of their views, even though his views on this subject are now seemingly sourced from lay people inside this group rather than from any scholarly perspective. Peterson and his audience appear to be caught in a cycle of mutual validation, where facts get thrown out in favor of in-group affirming rhetoric. It's a bit ironic, wouldn't you say? Thanks for watching. It's nice to get a chance to use my counseling psychology degree for my content, so I'm glad you guys seem to like this topic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.